Rivers were no longer needed to turn the wheels of factories, for they began to operate their machines with steam power. From iron were made factory machinery, locomotives, and other products that were basic to America's industrial growth. And so, many cities began growing into great industrial centers, and eventually turned our nation into the industrial leader of the modern world.
Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I am going to theorize using some concepts of Carol Anderson's work on white rage. Carol Anderson is a historian from Emory University in Atlanta, and she wrote a book titled White Rage. And she's a very meticulous historian, and she outlined a historical premise around like what she described as white rage. So click the link if you want to know more about Carol Anderson's work in white rage. And plus, there's some other good books that you might find helpful as well. But white rage, I won't go into it. Click the link if you want to learn more about it. All right. So it's toward a theory of white rage, deindustrialization, and the reorientation of Black America. So basically, and really sort of, pedestrian language, the idea of white rage or deindustrialization as a form of white rage and the ways in which that reorientated Black America, the ways in which that changed Black America. So deindustrialization was in fact an act of white rage. This is what I'm theorizing. White rage is when Black people progress and start to attain, economic and political, cultural strength and authority. White rage comes and excavates it and disrupts it. It's a long historical pattern of this. And that's what the book White Rage does. One of the things that I'm saying is that deindustrialization was a form of white rage, right? And this is a theory, and there's a lot of holes in it. Obviously, it's just something that I'm thinking about and thinking through. And I encourage people who are in migrant studies or history and sociology, and those who do sort of social historical analysis and whatnot, and social political analysis as well, to take up these sort of urban development studies and urban replacement or urban placement studies. All of these kinds of disciplines, I think, could take this idea of deindustrialization as an act of white rage and build on it. And maybe cite me, maybe cite me. I mean, that would be the academic thing to do, especially if you find it to be useful. But in all seriousness, I do encourage people to, if this is something, if it pans out to be something that is useful, build on it. Build on this idea, because I think that there's something to this. All right. Before we go further, I need you to like and subscribe to my channel and watch the other videos that follow. There's a list of, very important topics that I cover. And I think that, a lot of these conversations should be out there to more people. In order for me to continue doing this stuff, right? Like I need an audience, because I do have, other responsibilities. And this is one of the things that I really want to do and to develop, and I want to evolve. And, and it takes people like you all, to help get the word out. So I appreciate that. All right. So it's like I mentioned, this isn't a developing theory. It's raw and it's still evolving. And I know there are going to be holes in it, which is obvious. And I welcome serious thinkers, scholars, historians, economists, and organizers to challenge it. So building loosely on Carol Anderson's concept of white rage, I believe, as I mentioned in the opening, that deindustrialization in the United States should also be examined through the lens of racial power and racial backlash, because that's what white rage is, right? More specifically, I'm asking whether the dismantling and offshoring of industrial labor was not simply an economic transformation, but partially a political and racial response to the growing economic, social, and political advancement of Black America during and after the period of the Great Migration. So in other words, was the political power and the political will that was starting to emerge and become more solidified within Black America was the backlash to that, or how much of the backlash to that had to do with companies and organizations, corporations' decision to offshore. Because the official argument was, well, you know, the labor was cheaper, it was cheaper to do it. But that's an oversimplification, because what role does the government play as saying to these corporations who built their wealth in the Americas, in the United States, who built significant wealth, to then say, okay, we're going to excavate a whole entire economic infrastructure, like that's foundational to the economic order in the U.S. We're going to excavate this and take it and bring it offshore. And with that, the loss of thousands, tens of thousands of jobs nationally, because we want to save a few dollars. So the government has a role in this, because the government can say, okay, absolutely not. You can't do that. You built your wealth here. Number one. Number two, you're going to cause a catastrophe within and across and throughout the American labor force. You're going to destroy urban areas and large swaths of suburban and rural areas as well. That is going to be a catastrophic long-term consequence. And we can't, as the government, as a responsible government, we can't allow that. And if you do it anyway, we're going to tariff everything that you try to send back here, so it will offset whatever money that you make or whatever money that you save. We'll tariff you, and it'll offset whatever dollars you use. That would have immediately changed the hearts and minds of the corporations. But maybe, arguably, because so much of our politicians are bought and sold by these corporations and these lobbyists, maybe that's why the government didn't put up the fight. Maybe that's part of it. I'm sure that's part of it. But also what's part of it is the foundational development of Black Americans within the United States, right? There's so many layers to what happened as a result of the intention to offshore American jobs. Now look at China, because many of those jobs went to that part of the world, and China was able to get in and absorb it all. And China went from, you know, what they would call a peasant nation to a global superpower in about 3, 4, 5 decades. 30 to 50 years. China has become a superpower. How much of that had to do with the decision of the United States government and along with the United States corporations to offshore its jobs to that region? And think about how devastating that decision was, if in fact it was a byproduct of white rage or a backlash to the development of Black communities and Black power and Black economics and the building of Black community across the United States. Think about that for a second. When we think about, it's not far-fetched, when we think about the ways in which the United States historically will and does, you know, cut off its nose to spite its face when it comes to Black people. So during the height of the U.S. industrialization, large numbers of Black Americans migrated from the South into northern and Midwestern cities, seeking industrial work, stability, opportunity through factory labor, union participation, urban concentration. Black communities began developing stronger economic foundations. They started to gain political influence. They started to get footholds within institutions and even starting and running and managing and building institutions themselves. And this led to social mobility. Black neighborhoods and businesses, schools, churches, as well as other religious institutions and organizations and political organizations expanded along with this industrial growth. So you don't just see the industrial growth, but you see all of these political and these black organized, institutions expanding alongside the industrial growth. But what happens when black people begin materially advancing within the structure of American society? What happens? What happened? Historically, backlash follows, or white rage, as Carol Anderson calls it. Historically, this is what happens. Whenever black people begin to materially advance within the structure of American society, we have the example of Wilmington, North Carolina. We have Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We have Slocum, Texas. We have Rosewood in Florida. We have Durham, North Carolina. We have so many examples. We have Bronzeville in Chicago. We have Black Bottom in Detroit. We have the Harlem Renaissance. We have so many examples of the backlash that happens when black communities start to advance. My theory asks whether deindustrialization, the offshoring of factories, manufacturing, and the industrial infrastructure that came along with that should also be understood as part of this broader racial and political restructuring. Should it be part of this idea of what we call white rage or the racial backlash? The removal of jobs, industrial jobs, devastated black communities. And these were like pillars in our economic ecosystem, right? Entire neighborhoods, tens of thousands of people, black Americans, suffered from unemployment, instability, disinvestment, a shrinking tax base, weakened institutions. And this raises a provocative question. Was this the result of white rage? Was this the result of the historical pattern of backlash when it comes to black progress? Think about that. That's devastating, right? So I'm not arguing that deindustrialization happened solely because of black advancement. But what if it did? And that would be too simplistic. But still, what if it played a role, any role? But I do believe race, racial anxiety, and white backlash deserve far more attention within discussions of economic restructuring. I do believe that. Just like I believe that when it comes to gentrification. It's race plays a big part in all of this. And I think it played a similar role in the deindustrialization that happened. And this leads to another connected point. The replacement and sidelining of black Americans in many institutions and institutional spaces must be examined carefully and honestly. This is not an attack on immigrants or immigrant people. People who come to the United States seeking opportunity, they are not responsible for these systems. They didn't create them. They didn't even create the environment that necessitated them. So this is not about them. My critique is directed strictly at the white power and governance within the United States. Historically, black Americans, particularly those of us who are the descendants of enslavement and Jim Crow and the Great Migration, we function as the most vocal, moral, and political forces, pushing the country to confront its contradictions around democracy and inequality and race. Black Americans have repeatedly challenged the legitimacy of American hypocrisy, both domestically and globally. And we've made an impact, and the impact of black Americans have given rise and helped to, provide cues and bravery to other people across the globe. That's just what it is. But what happens when that population becomes economically weakened, politically fragmented, historically erased, and institutionally replaced? I mean, wouldn't it make sense to do that? Like, if you're a country that's hell bent on maintaining white supremacy, why wouldn't you figure out ways to silence and eliminate the groups of people or the people that will stand in your way? It's simple politics. It's simple. Like, the United States does this to sovereign nations across the globe. So you think they're not able to have an impact on Black Americans in their own country who are not a sovereign nation, who don't have a standing military? What happens when historical memory disappears? What happens when communities who are deeply rooted in struggle and justice are displaced by populations who don't share the same historical relationship to American racial politics? What happens? Again, it's not about blaming anybody. This is about understanding how systems of power reorganize populations, reorganize communities, reorganize neighborhoods, institutions, and the political influence in ways that maintain existing hierarchies. This is what this is about. This is the conversation that I'm trying to have. And if these conversations make people uncomfortable, that discomfort should not be confused with hostility. Difficult historical questions require nuance, and they require honesty and the willingness to think structurally rather than with emotions. They think structurally rather than emotionally. I'm not trying to play on the emotions of people who are deeply impacted by, immigration politics. I'm not playing on their emotions one way or the other. And for those of who are aware of the history of the United States and its structures, they shouldn't even take it that way. They should understand this is part of the historical trajectory of who and what the United States has always been. So again, my theory about the relationship between deindustrialization as a form of backlash or white rage is still developing. But I believe it offers one possible framework for understanding the collapse of Black industrial communities, the weakening of Black institutional power, the rise of mass incarceration, the fragment of Black political identity, and the broader reorganization of racial power in the United States. And there are three areas of organization and action that I want to highlight. The first one is rebuilding Black institutional and economic infrastructure. Black communities cannot solely rely on symbolic representation. I mean, Barack Obama was nice to have, it was great to see a Black, a person who embodied, the Blackness that so many of us are familiar with, and the warmthness and the swagger and whatnot of someone who was clearly raised and cultured, adopted by the city of Chicago, Black Chicago. But it was important to see that. But that's really a symbolic representation. And there must be a renewed focus on cooperative economics, skilled trades, land ownership, the development of local businesses, and independent educational institutions. I could say, like, if I could put this on a billboard, the importance of independent educational institutions that function as Black institutions. The second, restore historical and political education. We must continually teach about the history of Black labor in the United States. I don't think, as a teacher, as a professor, as someone who teaches, I'm not sure that we do this, maybe in other fields, but I'm not sure that we do this enough. And even I'm not even talking about within the fields of education, because a lot of what we need and what's happening in education in the fields and in academia doesn't translate to everyday Black folks. So I don't even think everyday black folks, forget about academia, I don't think we know enough about the history of black labor in the U.S. We don't know enough about the Great Migration. Like we don't know enough about how it has formed the United States as we know it. Like the relationship between the South and the rest of the United States is central. Because Chicago ain't Chicago without Mississippi and Arkansas migrating to Chicago. New York City ain't New York City without North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, etc. going north to New York City and establishing those communities there. New York City ain't New York City without that. The same with Philly, the same with LA, the same with Oakland. LA and Oakland ain't the same without Louisiana going out there, without Texas, without Mississippi, without Alabama. Alabama went several places. Alabama was everywhere. Alabama and Mississippi, Alabama was New York. It was Detroit. It was Chicago. Mississippi was LA. Oakland was Chicago, Detroit. Like these cities, these urban cities aren't the same without the South. So we need to learn and we need to teach more about the Great Migration. We need to teach about deindustrialization. We need to talk about deindustrialization and what it did to black communities, and how it led to mass incarceration, and how it led to a drug war. There's so many black folks out here that are against the idea of black folks, having the wherewithal to save our institutions, like our contributions to the United States, to identify ourselves. Like there are black people, black Americans who actually think that this is problematic. But they would never say that about any other group. Anywhere, black, white, or whoever. They would never say that about another Latin, a Latino, or an African, or any other group of people, European, who align with their flag and align with their people and align with their customs and their traditions. But for black Americans to find it an issue with black Americans wanting to preserve our legacies and our histories, how is that a threat? If it ain't a threat for everybody else in the world, how is it a threat when we do it? And how are black folks taking issue with it? The third one, rebuilding intergenerational community structures. Sorry for all these big words. But one of the greatest losses has been the weakening of relationships between the elders and the youth, organizers and communities, schools and neighborhoods, mentorship and leadership development. Right? We need, these are things that we need to do. These are things that can be done. Communities survive through relationships, counsel, being accountable, holding each other accountable, and shared political consciousness. Shared political consciousness, meaning that we find individuals who will represent our interests. And we vote for them. We put them up for election. We fund them. We vote for them. Or if they already exist, we hold meetings with them and we tell them, this is how you get our vote. Some people think that this is asking too much. Black politicians who think this is asking too much, they should be looked at as traitors, as far as I'm concerned. The building of black community life must involve not just policy, but restoring the trust amongst us, the collective responsibility, and cultivating leadership. We need to reestablish leadership and leaders. We have been sort of brainwashed, and a lot of it happens in our schools. A lot of it happens at early ages in schools, where little young black students aren't seen as leaders. Their confidence is not seen as a leadership quality. Their humor is not looked at as something, that is to be built upon. Their ability to lead is sometimes looked at as threatening. So a lot of young black kids in schools have to tamper those down in order to maintain it, in order to stay in school, because those qualities that will be looked at if they were in other groups, especially white groups, if they had those same qualities, right, they will be looked at as leaders and they will be positioned as leaders. But black students aren't viewed that way in our schools. And as a result, they have to either tamper it down or quit school. or if they're fortunate enough to be in a school that nurtures them and nurtures those qualities. But those are far and few in between. This is a theory about white rage and deindustrialization, or deindustrialization as a result of white rage, and how this has reoriented Black America. If you like these videos and if you like this content, I advise you to please share, like, subscribe, comment. I read all the comments. I often respond to many comments. And, like I do this for y'all. I do this for my people. I do this for the people. And I'm in conversation with you all. I learn a lot from people in my content, people who respond. There are a lot of really brilliant folks who enlighten me about something that I didn't really think about. And I appreciate those people. And then there are the requisite critics. Some of them are useful as well. And if you want to see more about the book White Rage, my breakdown of it by Carol Anderson, click this link. I talk about that and a couple of other books as well. That's it for now, y'all. Peace.
Word up, quick to set it, don't wet it. Real niggas lick shots, peace, Connecticut.
Yo, what up, yo? Time is running out. It's for real, though. Let's connect politics,